Well, we have so much visual information to process all the time. I started to feel that communicating also with other ways of understanding through the other senses would sort of allow us to access, I'm not sure if more, but different ways of knowing. Yeah.
This is Future Based Podcast with your host Sabine Winters. Future Based veers off the beaten path to make way for an optimistic approach of the future, with podcasts, reading sessions, reflections, meetup, performances and everything in between. Perhaps it's something of all times to think that we are on a turning point, but it seems that there are so many writings on the wall we can't ignore that indeed we are, due to technology, living on the border of a paradigm shift. In our belief, our world perspective will change dramatically in the next coming 20 years. It's just that we sometimes can't see clearly what's right under our collective nose. Our world isn't only changing, it's changing faster than ever. Nevertheless, there's a tendency to forget the importance of reflecting on how the world is changing, and in particular what the consequences of these changes might be. In this perspective, future-based engages philosophy as a form of activism, and we use it to question the status quo and the established frameworks we tend to believe in so dearly. Not to necessarily find straight answers, but to formulate more specific questions and to foster a deeper understanding of the world we live in. For more information, visit futurebased.org.
Maybe our belief in science has become so strong, the mind has become so dominant that we have a hard time accepting or relating to our intuitive part.
Annika Kappner is an artist who creates multi-sensory compositions in the extended field of painting, installations, sculpture, sound and performances. She makes, as she's calling it, sensory-senographies, with the intention to let people connect in a different way with our surroundings. Not only visually or through sound, but also with the other senses, for example through touch, smell or the sense of movement, and through inner images and through guided meditations. With her research, she uncovers the multi-layeredness of our perception. In this podcast, we will listen to Annika about her sources of inspiration and how she researches the alternative ways of experiencing the world around us. In what other ways could we be able to perceive the world, and why should we even bother?
So it's Gaia Rising is a prequel to a project called Deep Planetary Sensing, which has a couple of, let's say, major inspiration blocks in terms of other researchers, philosophers. And the one which is very important is Federico Campagna. He's an Italian philosopher. And he wrote a book called Technique and Magic. And basically he talks about the spell of technique. So how we as, especially the Western society, we are under the spell of the idea that expansion is infinite, that it is also necessary, and that in order to allow for that, we need to be more and more efficient. And he ties that into language. So how only things that can be categorized, compartmentalized, and grouped together in order to be organized in an efficient manner are officially existing and also valuable for us. So it also has to do a lot with how do we attribute value to things if we cannot name them. And and of course this goes into various layers. He also mentions, for example, the status of a person without an ID or a passport, a refugee, that's also a person that in a certain way, for a lack of identification, nameability, identifiability, falls off our
spectrum.
It becomes, let's say, we cannot deal with it anymore because it becomes ungraspable to us onto a certain level of our system. And what he proposes as an antidote is the idea of the ineffable, the unnameable. And tying into his research, to me, what became very interesting is the idea also of Pauline Oliveros, a composer that passed away, I think, in 2016. And her life work is the project called Deep Listening, hence also the name of the project I'm busy with, Deep Planetary Sensing. Her idea was, she's a composer, and her idea was that her musicians, they were so tuned into being also very efficient all the time, to be, let's say, active, to be in a certain way manipulating what they were doing. So they were very much on an output level rather than input. She developed this concept of deep listening in order to cultivate intuition and receptivity. And as a let's say counterbalance to this dominance of this efficiency focus and the active mode of being. I discovered her, I think, beginning of the year, while I was doing a work for the new institute here in the Netherlands, which was already dealing with, let's say, other forms of knowing, which is also related to her way and the idea of more than human knowledge. And in that research, I encountered Pauline Oliveros, and together with her, actually another researcher, Anne Baring, who is, she's trained as a historian and became then a Jungian analyst. And she has a very interesting theory on indeed, let's say, the sensorial, well, her theory is not sensorial, but she talks about also the reintegration of these capacities of intuition and receptivity. And she explains, let's say, historically, over the last 5,000 years, why we have sort of lost that through various historical evolutions, and how that also relates to how that defines our relationship with the female, the body, the senses, nature, let's say the other, and how a certain Western and oftentimes very patriarchic and in the past also colonial view came about, and how that is tied in to ways of sensing.
Venus rising, Venus rising, Venus rising.
I think for me it's important because, as mentioned in the discourse of Federico Campagna, this idea of efficiency and compartmentalization also creates a lot of distance between us and the other. And actually, humans become a resource, any resource, so minerals, plants, animals, humans, we all become resources that are in a certain way stripped of something else, which is what he calls the ineffable. And I feel that also I have a background in finance, so I've actually been part of the system that, through this possibility of abstraction and categorization, actually has created a whole value system. And these belief systems contribute largely to the way we deal currently with the planet, and hence also to the current crisis on, let's say, ecological, social, and political levels. So in that sense, I see that a reintegration of these capacities of intuition and receptivity, they can possibly counterbalance this dominance, overweight, and also really, well, let's say it's almost a dead end, because we are trying to find other solutions. But if we continue to try to do that with linear thinking, which is the very thing that has created these problems, it will be very hard to come up with alternative ways of being and dealing with each other. So in that regard, also based on research of other authors that have worked on that, I feel it's because, the whole, let's say, Haraway and Karen Barad, and in the past years, there has, of course, been created a lot of collective imaginary, or like a discourse around how important it is to deal differently with each other. But I feel that that's something that we are already integrating that, right? Like we are already creating communities. We are already through being with each other, we are sort of, to use Haraway's word, weaving different stories. I feel that still there's an even more internal part, which is also sensorial, and which is, in that sense, even more embodied maybe, or not even more, but it's complementary, or also necessary to work on maybe an even more conscious focus to cultivate intuition and receptivity.
Gaia rising, Gaia rising, Gaia rising. Gaia rising, Gaia rising, Gaia rising.
And so the project is, the intention is to introduce the idea that we can actually have a conversation with Gaia, with the earth, and that the earth in itself, life in itself, actually always communicates with itself. That's how it's also organized. And we are now going into deeper and deeper levels of understanding how that works. It's very often through resonance, so different forms of vibration, audible, visible, or in a, let's say, non-officially, well, not officially, that's not the right word, but a spectrum that as humans we are not conscious of perceiving. But this communication is always ongoing. So I'm interested in opening up our
bias of the senses?
Yes, yeah, to let's say move out of this idea that actually communication happens only through word, sound, maybe body language, but it's really on multiple levels that I'm also not aware of. But I'm interested in deconstructing that and exploring what else is there. The consciousness that emerges and sets creation in motion. And incantation is actually very interesting because, as far as I understand, I'm not a pro here. As in, like, I don't know how, I can't do incantation, let's say it like that. But from researching how it works, for how far I understand it works, is the idea of an incanto. It's a rhythmic repetition of a set of words. And it is said that if that is done with fully focused attention, it creates actually the desired effect. And at the same time, what it's supposed to do is to create a sort of energy focus, a reshaping of the organization of matter in a very specific manner.
Could you say it's like a spell?
Yeah. Incantation is certainly like also related to the idea of spell. But to me, what was quite interesting when I thought a bit further about it, that it has to do a lot with focus and attention, and actually also with resonance. And this is something that in this project is to me very relevant, because we use that also in our colloquial language a lot, like that something resonates with you. That so it means that there is some sort of vibratory exchange going on. And that, for example, different people have a different vibe, So we use all these things really a lot. And if you look at, let's say, at the way life on our planet communicates with itself, there was recently, I'm doing a work also that relates a lot to sound and plants. And plants, for example, there are some that they can sort of sense when a pollinator is approaching, and they produce more nectar. So there's a communication going on, which is not in the audible spectrum, but it's a frequency also. And this is just one example. So it seems, that matter in a certain way is really vibration. So the idea of resonance and vibration is something that in a certain way is almost omnipresent for as far as we can grasp that. And in that relation, incantation and rhythmic repetition, to me, makes also sense as something that tries to organize things or shape things in a very specific manner. And that in a certain way is to me relevant in general in my work. And with this one maybe even more so because it's about communicating in a different manner. So also about how we resonate with each other, with ourselves, with animals, plants, the planet. And also the fact to use, let's say, different sensorial elements means that you're trying to communicate on different levels of resonance. I guess, what I'm using is actually the fact that our whole system of perception is built in such a way that we're only made aware of certain things when they're out of the ordinary. Because originally all our sensory organs, they're meant to eat. Like eyes were developed actually for us to be able to be better hunter. Us. When we were during the Cambrian evolution, when life developed further, eyes are sort of the tools that allow us to hunt. And then the other senses are developed also as a warning system. So when there's a very loud sound, we become alert. When something smells burnt, we become alert. When somebody smells really good, we feel attracted. So it's kind of exceptions from the normal, let's say the regular state, that makes us aware. And so to give you another example, when you're in a restaurant, there's a lot of noise, but your system blends that out. Like unless the acoustics are really bad, depending on how sensitive to that you are, you're able to have a conversation with whomever you're at the table.
Yes.
Because let's say your way of perceiving it kind of blends it out and it puts it in the background. And only when there is something that doesn't fit that environment, you will pay more attention to it. And what I do with my work is that I try to I work with things that are connected to the themes that I'm researching. And at the same time, I put things together that in a normal set, or let's say in reality, in a non-constructed reality. Wait, this is a difficult one. How can I say that better? Well, non-constructed as in like not intentionally hacked. Yeah, I would call it maybe hacking. Through these little kind of hacks of something that wouldn't necessarily appear in like a restaurant setting, for example, I seek to ever so slightly open up to make you more perceptible, basically, to open something up. I try to also find out collectively, really, what does work for us today in terms of connecting and having a conversation, also through the body, rather than only through the mind.
Human nature, human will, human desire. Human nature, human will, human desire.
Because what we're discussing now, these
Yes.
things, they also relate to the ideas of mindfulness. And I get that quite often in relation to like the thoughts I've been developing on, also like working with the body and sort of going inside ourselves and so forth. That people are like, oh yeah, that relates to mindfulness. And something that for me is quite important in that regard. Because I think mindfulness as it is used today, it's still very often used to still just further increase productivity. So to make us in a certain way even more submissive to this system that we are all part of and that we all perpetuate, of being more efficient, more this, more that, faster, da 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 da. So I think it's great if we are efficient, and if we can be focused and clear and sharp. The idea is also really within these works that it's really also serving to cultivate something else, which is indeed intuition and receptivity, which might also yield productivity, however, not in the sense of this being like the sole purpose and more than anything, the sole goal, because I think that's the thing, right? Because now this is actually how I got to the project in a certain way, that right now, at least on a structural level, so let's say talking about the structures that we are embedded in on a political, social, more than anything economic level, that we kind of have a very hard time thinking outside of that, right? So that the end goal is like efficiency. And I think the stock markets, which is like something that I've been thinking about really quite a lot. And funnily enough, well, they come from, the first stock market trading started here in the Netherlands. So, this idea of efficiency and how people have created the most mind-blowing instruments, financial instruments to sort of build on top of that and on top of that. And it's like this never-ending story. On planet Earth, your location, on planet Earth. So I do think that there is in a certain way, I'm not sure about progress. I do think about evolution. We always change. There's always transformation. And there's like, at least in this three-dimensional world, no way around that. We always change and transform. And we also evolve. And I think this is something that to me, it helped me to sort of look at things with a bit more ease. At the moment, we are into absolute measurability of value, which is what money is, right? It's a very abstract system to value things. And that ties back into the discussion of Federico Campagna on the power of language, that what can be named and defined and quantified above anything is of value. And you see that in a certain way, like I think quite well, also in the value of art and society. And that there is oftentimes, here in the Netherlands at least, like to a certain degree, right? that funding is related to visitor numbers. And I do understand that too, for a certain part. At the same time, there's also something about things that are innovative and new and groundbreaking that might actually at the very moment, indeed because they are new, not speaking to so many people, which doesn't at all make them less valuable for the evolution of the field and maybe even for the evolution of many more people, right? Because art in a certain way is this space where indeed it's a fantastic space for speculative thinking and imagination. There's not so much space for a lot of reflection. And in that sense, indeed, I think that's a very vital role of art. And that's something that in the way right now value is attributed within at least the funding system, for example, partially it's difficult to measure, right? It's very difficult to measure. So that becomes like an issue. And that's likewise, and that's simply the sort of easy way out is short-term profit. Now talking about, let's say, business, within the arts, it's, for example, the sort of easy way out is visitor numbers, you know? Mm-hmm. And I know that this is more complex, you know, but basically it's about how we manage to value certain things. And, you know, if you want to talk about sustainability and all these things, it's simply about the fact that right now, because it's cheap to extract certain resources because we got better and better and better at it, we don't pay so much for certain minerals or for certain raw materials, as we call them. But maybe the impact that actually the extraction has is like devastating to all of us. So it's like this idea, of course, of how do we value and how do we calculate things, right? How do we agree upon them? So I think that's like I guess that's like one of the things that is key to our understanding indeed of collective agreement and collective valuation.
The world is completely entangled in the Anthropocene with human technologies, human reasoning, and human-centered knowledge infrastructures. In addition, this knowledge is characterized by the global society's increasing dependence on results and the further expansion of scientific and technological developments. Countering the many advantages of this technological society, there's also a recently discovered price tag that we maybe cannot afford to pay. In the light of urgent ecological circumstances, one of the greatest challenges is to rethink the relationship between man and the world. Underlying is the search to define what is of value. What are the infrastructures of value in the Anthropocene? By repositioning ourselves as human beings and exploring the blind trust we have in our senses, we can maybe open up alternative ways of knowing and being in the world. Annika Kappner will be part of a meetup of future-based Bias of the Senses that will take place the 18th of January 2020 in the Netherlands. For more information, please visit our website at futurebased.org. There you will find also show notes on this podcast and the website of Annika and more information about the platform itself. You can join our community on Facebook or follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram or Twitter, or subscribe to our newsletter. The awesome interludes you listen to are made by Annika and part of her guided meditation Gaia Rising. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and until next time.